Okay, so I wanted to talk about some of the different types of models that you can do. There's various purposes that models can solve. I like to categorize my models between sketch models, which are more for my benefit, where I'm making something, it's not necessarily in proportion, it's more so that I can kind of relate to it as a three-dimensional object and start to consider all viewpoints of it from 360 degrees. For me, just being able to like turn something over in my hands is really helpful for being able to understand how something could be made and also just how you'll be able to interact with it as a user or as a viewer. So those are sketch models. A lot of these paper and Scotch tape models that I have here are all sketch models. They're just for my benefit, trying to get inspiration from a particular type of twisting or particular type of surface manipulation, and none of them are actually to scale. And then the other type of model, which is the model that ultimately you will be making for your final project, is going to be a scale model. So a scale model means that it's to a specific scale. It doesn't necessarily need to be as simple as quarter scale or half scale. As Sean demonstrated earlier, you could just choose a scale that happens to work with a photocopier and with the materials you have at hand. But the important thing about a scale model is that it maintains the same proportions as the final piece will eventually have. Having those proportions is incredibly important for creating the look of something. And that way, when you build it as a final piece, you're not surprised by the proportions or the scale. So some of these paper models are scale models. So you can see here, I was trying to work out a bed. So one half of the bed, I have sort of multiple staggered, twisted pieces. Another half of the bed, they all kind of pull together as one piece. So it looks like they're peeling apart from each other. This guy here is a piano leg that my class in school was doing for Steinway. They basically gave us specific proportions that they wanted to maintain for their pianos and for their height and for the usability of the pianos, but then we were allowed to go into everything else on the Steinway piano and sort of like question why it was there and try to make new forms. So these are two different legs that I made for Steinway. Models are also a really great way to lock down a commission. If you have something that represents what the object will look like and when it's been physically made, your client is much more able to relate to a three-dimensional object than they are to orthographic drawings. Unless you're specifically trained to read orthographic drawings, they can be really confusing to the average person. So making a model is going to be a lot more engaging to your client, and they're a lot more likely to write you a commission check. Models can also be used for material experiments. So I'll often, particularly if I'm going to do a type of texture or a type of joinery that I'm not sure of, I'll actually model it in full scale, meaning 1-to-1 ratio, and just kind of see what it feels like. But that way I'm not married to creating a perfect piece. I can try multiple different iterations of the same texture. So I just wanted to show you a few more polished models. All of these paper models, they tend to be more for me or for the photographs because they don't last very long. They're very delicate. But I did want to show you a couple more durable models that you could consider making for your final project. So this right here is a table that I made as a commission piece for a woman who, she didn't have too much that she specifically wanted. She mostly wanted a 7-foot round table. And she originally wanted some live edge detailing. And I was able to convince her that having just like a cute angled carved detailing in the center would be a lot more interesting and also a lot more engaging to me as well. And then you can see here I have made sort of mini bent laminations for the legs. So to make those mini bent laminations, I just put together this really simple kind of scaffolding out of MDF, just a couple screws and a couple lap joints. And then from there, I was able to make multiple versions of the legs. I also had these double twisted legs that I offered to her as an option. For the bent lamination class specifically, you can definitely grab some of the 1/40th thickness veneer from the instructor's room. That's free to all students as long as you just asked your instructor. And you can actually make a miniature scale mold and a scaled lamination on the mold. And that's going to give you a ton of feedback about troubleshooting with your mold, about where the laminates are naturally going to want to kind of pull apart and you need more clamping pressure. Ultimately, though, this type of miniature lamination is very time consuming. So I would only do this if you've really dialed in your design and you just want to make sure that the spatial relationship of your piece is in line with what you have in your head. Faster and easier ways to simulate bent lamination. One of the fastest ways are going to be paper and tape, but also you can see is easiest to damage. I've also gotten creative with some of the strapping that comes on the outside of crates, and then just going in with a staple gun and stapling it until it stood still and stopped moving. And then I've even used strips of acrylic in this case and used my riveting gun to rivet the pieces together quickly. For those of you that are interested in CAD software, specifically Rhino or Fusion 360 or SketchUp, you can choose to 3D print your designs. So this is a really cool model where Sean actually 3D printed these dovetails. So it's a working model, so you can simulate exactly how this joinery is going to come together. And one of the great things about 3D printing is that our 3D printing department offers 3D printing for free. Normally you would have to pay per square inch of this plastic material that you use. But in our case, as long as you go in there with an STL file that they're able to read on their computers, they will print your model for free for you. So that's a great resource. Here's another 3D printed little bench for intro. And you can see that Sean even managed to include the detailing of the carving in the center of the table. And then if you're interested in exploring other materials with 3D printing, there's multiple companies that offer 3D printing in multiple materials. They'll have gold, silver, steel, ceramic, pretty much anything that you can think of. As long as you have an STL CAD file, you can submit it and they will print it for you and then mail it to you. So you can print out the initial model in a cheaper material, like this white plastic here. And then if you wanted a more permanent model, say to gift to the client when you give them their full-size commission, you could say print this out in wax and then cast it in bronze. You might also benefit from changing multiple scales through your model. This first initial model I made out of a really cheap styrene plastic with packing tape and some additional layers of styrene in between to kind of gap open these two layers and create a reveal. And just assembled it all with packing tape just to kind of get the look of the piece. And then I made an additional model. This one, this was a specific scale. I believe it was 1/4 scale for a hanging chandelier that I wanted to make. And this was to dial in the technical details of this piece. So how is it actually going to work with a vacuum bag? How are these continuous pieces going to join together? And how was I going to space the two layers evenly to allow for LED lighting in between? And then one final option, again, for those of you who are interested in Rhino and CAD software, there is a command in Rhino and I believe a few other CAD softwares called Unroll, where basically if you make a 3-dimensional object and break it up into surfaces, you can unroll those surfaces flat, sort of like the template for a piece of clothing. And then you can tape those surfaces together to create a 3-dimensional model. So you can see, like, it wasn't too much work for me to create 6 copies of this particular profile and then tape them together, and very quickly I can get an idea of what this object looks like three-dimensionally. So ultimately, the purpose of model making, it can serve many intentions. First of all, you want to give your ideas some reality. When you're sketching, it's really easy to kind of like mush around proportions and not really be married to a specific dimension or a specific curve. So model making just kind of gives you a bit of accountability and forces you to consider an object three-dimensionally. This is what I would consider to be more of a sketch model made in the design class, but you can see that the student was already starting to think about the layout of the interior of the cabinet, what the front of the cabinet would look like, how much it would reveal of the contents. And this is a pretty damaged model that I made for a dining table, but ultimately it still got my point across. Because all I wanted was for the client to be able to visualize how a two-dimensional bend would be coming together with radial symmetry.